Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing what we covered in class with all the classes um, on August 12th. Second day of school, we covered the concept of rules and why they're important. The students started off with a do now prompt of imagine a school with absolutely no rules and what would happen. And then they would ask, could a school have too many rules? Now, they were asked to write these 3 to 4 sentences per question, and that question, and they would respond as a group. So some of the answers we got were it would be chaotic, it would be dangerous, there would be no structure, there would be no understanding of what was supposed to happen. But the other answer we got was you can have too many rules. Some students thought you couldn't, some students thought you could. But the truth is you can very easily have too many rules. It's why our rules that are in the parent letter only have 4. Be respectful, be responsible, be engaged, and be prepared. 4 very clear and concise rules that have a description underneath them. But our rules are put in place to make sure that we have a system by which we can go by. But what happens when we put too many rules? And we see this with the French Revolution very quickly as they move on to continue to add more and more rights to the rights of man. And this ends up leading Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher, to declare that the abstract nature of natural rights that came from the French Revolution made natural rights the concept of nonsense on stilts. Brought that up in the concept of when you see stilts, you tend to see them at a circus, you tend to see them at a fair, or some of the kids saw them at Scarowinds. The truth is, whoever's wearing these stilts is not supposed to be seen as a highly intelligent individual. They're supposed to be made fun of. So he's saying that because of the abstract concept that had come from the French Revolution, that we very quickly see natural rights being made fun of. Now, that led us into a discussion about the Declaration of Independence, because we see these truths self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we talked about the right to life. What is the right to life? Now, we could discuss the right to life as in, I have the right to be alive. But the negative context, I'm not talking about saying that it's negative to have the right to life, but the reciprocal of that is that it is, no one can take my life from me. Now, that's important because that changes the dynamic. We then addressed concepts such as just war, which was justified by Thomas Aquinas in his Ad Just Bellum and I can't remember, I forgot the second one, but Ad Just Bellum. And the idea is, if I am defending myself or I'm defending someone who cannot defend themselves, then it is okay to go to war. But we have this right to be able to live, and that's one of the reasons why a capital crime of murder is such a big deal. Now, we moved on to liberty, the right to liberty, and this is an interesting concept that the scholars tried to achieve, but at the same time, it's a concept we really don't take the time to think about, because when we say liberty, we tend to think freedoms. We tend to think of the Bill of Rights. We tend to think of things of that sort. But when we look at liberty, liberty is actually derived from the Latin word libertas. It's a set definition of rights and corresponding duties. That means that liberties do not mean do not mean all good things in the absence of evil. Thomas Hobbes actually is one of the places we get our inspiration of what liberties means. And he writes, if men were to be prevented from destroying one another, and making social life a jungle or a wilderness, greater safeguards must be instituted to keep them in their places. The famous political scientist Isaiah Berlin wrote, "Liberty is not who governs me, but rather how far the government interferes with me." Therefore, The government, the real liberty is the warding off of coercion and the ability to have these individual rights, or what we might call freedoms. Now, the word freedom is actually derived from the Northern European Germanic lands, and it's derived from the same word used as neighbor. Classical freedom sees the individual as the master of himself because of his rational ability for self-government. Western thought tends to see freedom as an equality of liberty that no one should be deprived of by others. John Locke puts this in probably the best context when he says there ought to be a certain number of freedoms that should not be violated, and if these freedoms cannot be protected by the government, then that government should be replaced. This is what we know as the Lockean social contract theory. The idea that the government is from the consent of the governed, and if they can't protect our natural liberties, our natural freedoms, then they need to be replaced. We actually see that reiterated in the Declaration of Independence when Thomas Jefferson brings up that England is not protecting us. But we move into the idea of the pursuit of happiness. Now, the pursuit of happiness, what makes me happy is different than what makes you happy. What makes me happy is the Gamecocks having a winning season. Wings on a plate if my student's writing a good essay. What makes you happy might be something completely different. So because of this, the pursuit of happiness is a little bit different than the Lockean system of state or property. But either way, it's the idea that you have the right to pursue a better life for yourself. All that being said, we have these liberties and we have these protected rights in the Constitution. Okay, example, the First Amendment right to right of speech, free speech. When we look at free speech, it says I have the right to say whatever I want to, whenever I want to, right? No, it says I have the right to say and not harm others. And that's one of the biggest things we want to look at when we talk about this coercive action, because we cannot harm or force someone else to do something, because then we are violating their liberties. So if I were to go and write a completely fabricated story and publish it in the newspaper, well, then I could be sued for libel or slander, and that but Mr. Green, what about my First Amendment rights? Your First Amendment rights were sacrificed when you decided to write something that was damaging to someone else without proof or evidence. So it becomes very important that we see that as well. But all of this in mind, we talked about how our rules and our laws and why we need government. It goes back to James Madison in Federalist 51, where he said, if men were angels, we would not need government. And so if men were some celestial being with divine purpose and could not sin, then we wouldn't need government. Government is used to facilitate the implication of laws. It is meant to govern the people. Thus, we need rules, we need procedures, we need the expectations of a classroom, of a society, to be able to establish a functional society. With that in mind, it is an absolute pleasure to be able to discuss this with our students, because these scholars were able to flow with this conversation and have a wonderful conversation with me about individual liberties and individual freedoms. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, but I do hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.